Imagine being a noblewoman in the 16th century. You have comfort, you have status, and you have protection. Yet, daring to follow your heart, you pick love. You defy your father, you defy social expectations to marry a man that you believed was honorable and brave. He was a Moor, and society judged him, but despite that, you stood beside him in loyalty and in love. However, under patriarchal societies, a woman's devotion is not enough. It actually makes her vulnerable. And this is the story of Desdemona. Shakespeare reveals in Othello that patriarchal marriages limit women to moral dichotomies, alienating them, and normalizing violence against women by portraying it as something that's private. In the exposition, Othello was introduced as the protagonist, a highly respected general who was logical and calm, whereas Iago was introduced as the antagonist, this conniving and resentful character who's hiding his true intentions through manipulation. Now, through characterization, Shakespeare establishes a society where a woman's value defines a man's reputation and honor, and this is especially true for marital relationships. As Iago speaks in aside and soliloquies, we'll see that dramatic irony takes place, because we, the audience, know that Desdemona is innocent, while Othello, a dynamic character who evolved under his hamartia from a loving husband to an abusive accuser, allows suspicions to turn into violence. And this is not just because of Iago's manipulation, it is also because of the internalized misogyny that he had already possessed at the time. And Iago remains a flat character. He consistently reinforces misogyny, and he was easily able to manipulate narratives in an already patriarchal and misogynistic society. With these literary elements, Shakespeare shows a story beyond jealousy. He dives deep into a patriarchal system that isolates women, reducing them to moral extremes, and enabling violence through silence. To further explore, I introduce to you Dr. Eve Pastorini, a sociologist here at Regis University, to examine how marriage's moral labeling and silence functions within patriarchal systems.
Well, I mean, for a long time, women were literally property. Not until 1970s did we have laws where you get divorced without claiming that there was abuse happening. The saying of, as a rule of thumb, you could beat your wife as long as it was as smaller than your thumb. And that was just seen as normal. Even up into I think it was 1980s, when women could get their own credit card without having a husband sign off for it or a loan at the bank. Those kinds of things. And for a long time, there were jobs and educations that were barred for women. So all of that contributes to women really having no role in society. There was a time when men were seen as rational and women were irrational, and men were more reasonable and thoughtful, and women were more like animals and were more, thus they could be property. Men had more like culture and society in them for not being that way. You know, it certainly gives men a lot of power. You know, that whole idea, people will say, like, if a woman is at the top of her field, oh, I know how she got there. She slept her way to the top, right? Like, why do we question her sleeping to the top? Why don't we question, like, who's this crazy person who's demanding that she do that, right? Like, what man in their right mind ask that of a capable person? I mean, there are some cultures where it's perfectly fine if your daughter or your wife or your sister loves someone that they're not supposed to, or is intimate with someone that they're not supposed to, you can kill them. And we have flavors of that in the United States, where people's behaviors are very tightly managed. Silence is never neutral. Silence always supports the status quo. It says to both the victim and the perpetrator, I don't have a problem with this. This is okay. There's something sacred about the home where we don't want to ask a lot of questions about it. It's their own thing. It's private. And so a lot of abuse ends up happening.
Dr. Pastorini's insight revealed that inequality in intimate relationship is not subjective, it's actually something that's socially constructed. When dependency is built into marriages, when women's reputations are regulated, when women's values are what defines their husband's honors, and when violence is treated as something that is private, is when we get power to concentrate in the hands of men, thus creating a patriarchal society. And with that in mind, I want to return to Othello. The first way in which this type of system controls women is moral labeling. which is the reduction of, in this context, women into categories that replaces their identity as human beings. In Act 5, when Cassio was attacked by Rodrigo, which was an orchestrated plan by Iago, Iago was still able to manipulate the situation and shift suspicion toward Bianca. As everyone rushed over to Cassio, the scene of the crime, Iago exclaimed, "Gentlemen all, I do suspect this trash," regarding Bianca, "to be a party in this injury." And notice how proof is unnecessary and how labeling, reducing, and degrading Bianca to an object does all the work. And what I believe is the most devastating part about these type of society is that these ideologies, these labelings, are not just reinforced by men, but also women. A few pages over, as Emilia enters the scene, she immediately conforms to Iago's lie without any prior proof that Bianca did the crime. Now, this was really surprising to me because Emilia has a really radical and untraditional way of seeing the society and life at the time. Yet even she is doing a lot of moral labeling. This is exactly how patriarchal cultures maintain control, by weaponizing reputations. Phoebe Merton, in her thesis, Strumpet, Huswife, and Whore Centering Othello's Bianca, challenges the long-standing assumption that Bianca is immortal because of her label as a whore. Citing Kay Stanton, she notes that Bianca never herself manifests any behavior indicative of prostitution. Never does she ask Cassio for any payment of any kind, and no sex partner other than Cassio is ever mentioned in connection with her. So despite the absence of textual evidence, Bianca is still viewed as a whore and impure. And as Merton explained, we could see that misogynistic interpretation is actually hardened into this culture. And this demonstrates how label appearance can overpower evidence reality. Once a woman is labeled impure, her entire reputation collapses, no matter if it's true or not. Shakespeare demonstrates this idea by illustrating how men talk about Bianca, not only in language but also in tone, to show how dehumanizing this framework really is. "Do you hear, Cassio? She gives it out that you shall marry her. Do you intend it?" "I marry her what? A customer? Prithee bear some charity to my wit. Do not think it so unwholesome. Ha ha ha." Cassio's language, tone, and laughter is not harmless. It's actually very intentional. Bianca is now placed beneath marriage, beneath commitment, and beneath human dignity. And this can be translated in the Madonna whore theory, where the pure woman, the Madonna, is protected and valued, whereas the impure woman, the whore, is dehumanized, they're mocked at, and they're oftentimes discarded. However, patriarchal control in Othello is not just limited to impure women. Even the ideal wife, Desdemona, is isolated structurally. Moral purity or her loyalty toward Othello does not protect her. Instead, it becomes another standard that she could be punished for failing. Emilia captures the cause of Desdemona's marriage after she's been verbally and physically abused. Emilia states, "Has she forsook so many noble matches, her father and her country, and her friends, to be called whore? Would it not make one weep?" Desdemona has not simply married a man, but she has also given up everything that she's never known and everything that she's ever had. In a structure where women move into marriages away from the original community, vulnerability is not accidental. It's actually a part of the process and built into the institution of it. Furthermore, Othello's language reveals how love can easily become a thing about ownership and control. Othello states, "Though that her jesses were my dear heartstrings, I'd whistle her off and let her down the wind to prey at fortune." So Desdemona is portrayed as something that could be trained, that could be controlled and just released whenever. Shakespeare not only illustrates alienation in the way that Desdemona is separated from her family and her country, but also the way how marriages can become structures of authority rather than mutuality. This structural inequality is further supported by scholar Ruth Vanita in her work Proper Men Following Women and the Unprotectiveness of Wives in Othello. Vanita argues that the tragedy is not simply the result of Othello's jealousy, but the result of a social system that treats husband and wife relationships as governed by different norms than other human relationships. Ultimately, Othello delivers the violence, but the system is what makes it possible. So in their framework, what happens within door is shielded from intervention. Violence between men may be treated as a public disorder, and we could see an example of that the night that Cassio got drunk and he fought, thus losing his rank as a lieutenant. However, violence against wives are treated as a private conflict that shouldn't be intervened, which directly supports that silence in Othello functions as permission for society to continue structural abuse. By the time violence is visible, abuse is already taking its course and the system is already in place. Women are isolated and morally labeled while the society is conditioned to look away and ignore it. Shakespeare makes this explicit by using language and norms that pushes women back into these private spaces. I want to turn back to the phrase speak within door. This matters because it frames conflict as domestic, something not meant for public judgment. It turns turns mistreatment and inequality into an internal household matter, which discourages intervention and normalizes violence. Upon seeing Othello strike Desdemona, Levitico has a conversation with Iago in Act 4, Scene 1, stating, "Is it his use, or did the letters work upon his blood, and you create his fault?" Obviously, shock is immediate upon seeing that scene, but he immediately tries to rationalize Othello's violence. This is exactly how enabling works. Violence is seen but softened, but it never stops. Today I have Mr. Levitico to kind of walk me through what was going through his head that day. So, Mr. Levitico, when you saw Othello striking Desdemona, what exactly was going through your head at that moment? Obviously, I was shocked. The Senate speaks of him so highly. I mean, he's so respected and capable. I never expected this from a man of his reputation, but he's out of control for sure. Yet, you didn't intervene, correct? I mean, at the end of the day, something must have provoked him, Even that letter, it was asking him to return and appoint Cassio in his place, so, And us men, we were stressed from war during this time and whatnot. It's really an argument between the husband and the wife. There's no need for us to get involved. Lodovico's character represents a society that recognizes violence but resists confronting it. So Shakespeare relies on not only just jealousy and ignorance, but also on a society that excuses behaviors and norms that should be condemned. Critics argue that Othello is primarily just about jealousy and manipulation, and that Iago's deceit and Othello's emotional instability is what caused Desdemona's death. Certainly, manipulation and jealousy is a part of the play, but we have to see how those elements really show how deadly the society can become. Patriarchal marriages grants husband authorities, it isolates wives, and it also discourages public from intervening. That is why Othello's personal hamartia is really impactful, because it is empowered by a system that treats women's suffering as something that is private and something that is negotiable through context. The tragedy of Othello, Shakespeare's exploration of patriarchal power, shows a story beyond just jealousy. It exposes a system where women are structurally isolated and morally labeled, and abandoned by a society whose silence allows violence to escalate. So, as modern audiences, Shakespeare is challenging us to examine whose voices are believed and heard, whose reputations are protected, and whose sufferings are disregarded. If tragedy is repeatedly shown to be avoidable, then its importance depends on what we do with that knowledge. Justice requires more than just words, more than just condemning individual violence. It requires confronting social structures that promote injustice and the silence that enable it.